was up before God.
That when I read that and understood that, that's for another chapter though. I don't want to confuse things.
Right.
We're already confused enough.
Smash like, share. That would be fire.
Alrighty. What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Unfolding Revelation podcast series, produced in partnership with Wayfarers Christian Church and Mid-South Christian College. My name is Nick Griffin. I'm the pastor at Wayfarers Christian Church, and I am joined today, as always, first off, to my right, our podcasting professor, Greg Waddell.
Hey, everybody. Good to be here.
He's a Revelation super fan, but today I'm going to say he's also a Revelation rock star. He's wearing a T-shirt. He's casual. You can see the tattoos. He's like, man, look at this guy. He's cool.
Far out, man.
And the other voice laughing you hear over to my left is the other Revelation super fan, our apocalyptic adventurer, our I want to find some alliterative S word for scribe. Because you've written so much of the Bible out. Maybe I'll figure it out by next time. But Zach House is here.
Hey, Mom.
So, the idea behind this podcast is it's just an opportunity for us to look at the book of Revelation, make connections with it throughout the Bible, and just kind of have a casual conversation looking at this very important book of the Bible. So far, we have made it through the first 4 chapters, and today we are starting in chapter 5. So, before we do anything else, we should probably read the chapter. So, why don't I do that for us? This is going to be Revelation chapter 5, and I'm going to be reading from the NIV.
Your iBible.
My iBible on my iPad. The NIV. So, chapter 5. Then I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll?" But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside it. I wept and wept because no one was found who was worthy to open the scroll or look inside. Then one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals." Then I saw a lamb looking as if it had been slain, standing at the center of the throne, encircled by the 4 living creatures and the elders. The lamb had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. He went and took the scroll from the right hand of him who sat on the throne. And when he had taken it, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. Each one had a harp, and they were holding golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of God's people. And they sang a new song, saying, "You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain. And with your blood you purchased for God persons from every tribe and language and people and nation. You made them to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God, and they will reign on the earth." Then I looked and heard the voice of many angels, numbering thousands upon thousands, and 10,000 times 10,000. They encircled the throne and the living creatures and the elders. In a loud voice they were saying, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise." Then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and on the sea and all that is in them saying, "To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honor and glory and power forever and ever." The 4 living creatures said, "Amen," and the elders fell down and worshipped.
Kind of sounding like a David Crowder band song there at the end, isn't it? Forever and ever and ever.
There's a lot of repetition in here. It's some interesting stuff. So the subtitle, the sort of like title for this chapter in the NIV version I have here is "The Scroll and the Lamb." So probably a good place to start is just the very first verse. It talks about looking up in the right hand of him who sat on the throne, there was a scroll that had writing on both sides and was sealed with 7 seals. Zach, you were talking to us beforehand about how often scrolls come up in apocalyptic literature or prophetic literature, let's say.
Right.
And you had lists here on your notes of all the references to scrolls, and it's like more than half of what you wrote down is just these references to scrolls. So we don't have time to read all of them, but maybe just list a few of them for our listeners if they want some homework and they want to go read up on some of these. List a few of the ones that you've got written down first.
So there's like, if you just do a word search, there's a lot for just the word scroll. But I just picked the ones that were like relevant, you know? But just very quickly, you got Isaiah 29, 30, and 34, as in like the chapters.
Yep.
Because I really believe like reading the whole chapter is pretty, you know, contextual. You want to know what's going on.
Rather than just pulling one verse out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Jeremiah 36, chapter 36, and 51. Ezekiel 2 and 3. Daniel 12. Jeremiah 5, and Malachi 3. And each one kind of has their own flavor, you know? But I think you can find all those flavors, you know, in Revelation, for sure. And that's kind of why they stood out to me. There's...
Because you talked about, like, each, oftentimes scrolls represent judgments, like prophetic judgments that are going to come. They're written on a scroll.
Like Greg said earlier, was referencing the one in Zechariah talking about a flying scroll that goes out and curses people.
It was giant, too, if I remember.
A giant flying scroll.
Giant flying scroll.
There's even a scroll that has 7 seals on it back there.
In Zechariah?
Well, no, in one of those references.
Oh, yeah.
And I won't tell you which one. Go and find it.
But this is also a helpful contextual, just like historical thing to point out that Greg, you pointed out for us, which is just that we think of scrolls as like, oh yeah, everybody had scrolls. That's like what they used instead of books. But you were saying, no, there's something very specific about scrolls.
We have the benefit of printing presses, and we've had that for several centuries. But people did not have in their living room book stands full of books. So this was extremely expensive to make a scroll because you had to hire somebody to copy down every letter, and it was expensive to make. The material was expensive, and if it was some kind of official scroll, like from a government agency or whatever, then it would have been guarded, and only authorized personnel could open the seal.
Break the seal, yeah.
That's what we have going on here. You know, who is authorized? Who is worthy to open this seal or the scroll? So
scrolls were not, it's not like you had just shelves of tons of scrolls laying in your house. They were very expensive, very valuable. And that's kind of how this chapter starts out. I was just talking about this very, very valuable scroll that is so valuable, in fact, that it has 7 seals on it, which is a recurring number in Revelation. We're going to see over and over. But also, no one on earth is found worthy to...
or in heaven, or under the earth.
Or under the earth, yeah. There's nobody worthy to open that scroll. It's just the thing that keeps coming up over and over again. And that worthy imagery is something that carries on from last chapter, right? Like chapter 4 is all about worthiness. Like that comes up over and over again. We talked about that in the last episode.
Yeah, and we'll talk about it more here. We'll get further on into this chapter, but I just wanted to say that I think in my understanding of what's going on here is that this scroll represents the rest of the book, the story. It represents the story that we're about to hear, and it can't be told. You can't tell the story unless they find somebody who's worthy to open the scroll and start telling the story. And so I think we're still kind of in the introduction to the book of Revelation. The first 3 chapters, which dealt with the letters to the churches, that was kind of like what they call a prolegomena of a book.
Yeah.
Kind of
Oh,
like the-
big word.
I was looking for a different word.
The intro to the intro.
The intro to the story.
Yeah.
And so now this is the intro. That was the intro to the book. This is the intro to the story. We're still in the, and as with most stories, the first several sections of it, you're being introduced to the characters. We're being introduced in this chapter to the main hero of the story.
And so that's where I was getting at. There's carryover in that both of these chapters, these intro chapters, have been talking about worthiness. But chapter 4 was talking about the worthiness of God as the king on the throne, and it describes the throne room, and it describes these creatures and all this language that would have been familiar to them of a heavenly throne room. And as you were saying, nobody would have batted an eye at, well, yeah, of course, God, the king on his throne is worthy. And so with the last chapter ending with the importance of him being worthy, that's, wouldn't have been a big deal. But in
At
this
least
one,
for the Jews, anyway.
right. But in this one, you suddenly get introduced to a lion and a lamb who are worthy, and the lamb being the one that's worthy is a new character that's somewhat
For the story.
for the story that's being introduced. And like you're saying, the hero of the story is being introduced here.
The hero of the story is the lion lamb. The lion who is also a lamb.
So
So you can't trust anything the lamb says then, right? Because he's lying.
Not that kind of lamb.
the roaring kind of lion. And so John weeps and weeps because nobody can be found that's worthy. And then there's one of the elders turns to him and says, "Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals." So that language of the Lion of Judah,
Yeah.
that's language pulled directly from Genesis, correct?
Yeah, I did a little bit of background checking on this, and I found a link that just blew me away. I knew about Genesis 49:9. I knew that was a messianic prophecy, where this is where Jacob is on his deathbed, and as a last kind of will and testament type of thing, he blesses his sons. Now, in the ancient Jewish world, I don't know if this also was in the other cultures as well at the time, but pronouncing a blessing in Genesis was more than just words. This was actual had. They believed it had actual. It actually made a difference in
It
history.
was like inheritance.
Yeah. And so he goes down through each of his sons and gives them a blessing, and you can find that in chapter 49 of Genesis. When he comes to Judah, it says, "Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stood down. He couched as a lion and as a lioness. Who dares rouse him?" And then the next verse says, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he comes to whom it belongs, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples." And I'm reading from the Revised Standard Version. And what's fascinating, well, there might be a couple of things I need to explain about this, just real quickly.
Yeah. Let me actually read it in the NIV because I think it makes it's a little bit clearer. And I'm going to start in verse 8. So this is 49:8. And this is, like you said, the blessings he's given. And it says, "Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. You are a lion's cub, Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down. Like a lioness, who dares to rouse him? The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his."
Right. And some of you who are some of our listeners who might be still using some of the older translations, like the King James Version, the American Standard Version. I also think the NASB still does this. Says until Shiloh comes, and I accepted that as well for many years, but come to believe that that this should not be translated. It was meant to be. In other words, it shouldn't be.
It's not a name.
It's not a personal name. It should actually be translated. The first time that it ever was translated as a personal name was like in the 1500s. All previous translations had always translated the phrase of the word
to the one to whom it belongs.
Yeah, and that's the meaning of the word has been variously translated. The RSV translates it until he comes to whom it belongs. I think yours said.
Mine says until he to whom it belongs shall come.
Until he, which is kind of the same idea. And what's interesting is that the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, translates it that way, until that which is his. Well, actually, this one says until that which is his shall come. But the point being that this is a prophecy that the rulership, that's what the scepter represents,
Right.
will be with the tribe of Judah. So it's with the Jewish people until, for a period of time, until the one comes to whom that rulership, that ultimate rulership belongs. And until the one who is worthy of receiving that scepter comes. And so that concept of worthiness ties right in with everything that we've seen in the previous chapter and in this chapter, which is all about who is worthy. And in the previous chapter, we found out that God is obviously worthy. The entire universe revolves around him. Here, we come to this lion character, who is also a lamb character, is just as worthy as the one who sat on the throne in the previous chapter. Now that's amazing. And it goes right back to this prophecy in Genesis 49:9.
And so this verse in Genesis is the one that gets used to justify the specifically David, but the kings of Israel being connected to the tribe of Judah, you know, and they're saying, see, it goes all the way back to Genesis. You know, it even says your brothers are gonna bow down to you. They're gonna praise you. You're gonna be the one that's in charge.
And think about that statement too. That's like,
it's very Joseph language.
yes.
I never noticed that before.
I forgot to mention this Ezekiel 21:27, which is where you have the same expression in the Hebrew.
Yeah.
Is translated this. It says, "This also shall not be until he comes, the one to whom judgment belongs." In other words, the one who is worthy.
And so this brings up this theme that you see. I've started to see a lot in Revelation of like kings, earthly kings, versus the King of Kings. And this is interesting because it's even the King of Israel, you know, being from the tribe of Judah, and Jesus himself being, you know, the root of David is what it says here. Jesus is from that line as well. But there's this moment prophesied from Genesis onward that kingship, Judah's going to hold that scepter until the one who rightfully deserves to hold that scepter, the one who is truly worthy to hold it, it'll get passed on to him. And we are seeing that worthy individual come forward. But what's always super cool about this, the sort of subversive nature of how God rules, we like lions as kings. You know, that makes a lot of sense to us. I remember watching the old Robin Hood cartoon when I was a kid, and the king in the Robin Hood cartoon, you know, they're all animals. The king is a lion because it's like, yeah, of course. A lion makes sense as a king. It's a regal, kingly character. But then there's this interesting juxtaposition of this Lion of Judah, and then John says in verse 6, "Then I saw a lamb."
Right.
And it's not just a lamb, but it's looking as if it's been slain, the lamb that was slain.
Told you that lamb was lying.
And the lamb being both a more peaceful animal than the violence we
Suffering.
associate, but also a sacrificial animal. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the point. This is the sacrificial lamb, which is so important. And that's the subversive thing. The Lion of Judah, the king that's worthy, is the sacrificial lamb.
There's a duality there.
Yeah.
I find this fascinating that for some reason, though this is not that frequent of a reference to Jesus, we have passages, but it's not as frequent as the lamb. But for some reason, Christians much prefer referring to Jesus as the lion.
Yeah.
And I wonder, in my head, I just wonder if that we're kind of enamored with the idea of power and that sort of thing, and we're not so enamored with the idea of suffering.
Yeah. The slain lamb is the one that he actually turns around and sees as worthy.
Right.
But the lamb language is here back in Genesis too.
In that same, go ahead and read it.
The rest of it is after that, until he comes to whom it belongs, the nations will obey him. With verse 11 says, binding his foal to the vine and his colt to the choicest vine, he will wash his garments in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes will be red from wine, and his teeth white from milk. Or white,
Whiter
with
than
me,
milk, is what mine
But-
says.
I mean, there's a connotation there that,
That he's talking about lambs. It's a
well,
kind
the
of
lion that is there, but what's interesting is he talks about the blood of the grapes. That's another huge thing in the prophetic world, especially with the Old Testament prophets, is talking about wine and the blood of the grapes and the blood of the prophets, is, exactly this, that the suffering part is there too.
Right. And your point being that pay attention to this language, especially there in Genesis, because it's going to come up again. We're going to see garments being washed and all kinds of other things that come up.
And even
Again.
talking about the grapes, the blood of
Yeah.
the grapes, that's a thing that'll come up in Revelation too.
Right.
Is the smashing wine grapes
Also
Yeah,
19, I
wine
think.
press.
somewhere around there?
It's
Yeah.
up in 19 again, too.
Yeah.
We'll put a pin in that.
Just pay attention to it.
Yeah.
Pay attention to it. Same with this search for someone who's worthy and the contrasting nature of that versus the kings of the earth as this thing that's going to come up, especially even in the next chapter. We're directly going to see the kings of the earth come up again, being juxtaposed against the worthy lamb.
Why do you think John broke down and wept so bitterly when he couldn't find somebody to open the scroll? I don't
Yeah.
have an answer. I'm just throwing that out
Yeah.
there. That's
Well, it has taken me aback when I read it because I'm like, man, he's very distraught about
Very
the fact that
distraught,
nobody
yeah.
can be
like,
found.
it shows that it represents something. This is like the culmination of all their expectations and all
Yeah.
their hopes.
Well,
and
and-
it's lost because the thing is sealed.
And that's what I was gonna say. There's this is just me speculating off the cuff here, but the messianic expectation of the people of Israel is something that's hard for us to emotionally connect with, because we're living on the other side of it. We know who the Messiah is, but it is really hard for us to understand the emotions that a oppressed and downtrodden people were feeling as they were waiting for that king to come and free them from their oppression. The freedom that they were longing for by this oppressive government, and they really, really wanted that. And so you're looking for this worthy king. You're looking around, and it's like, I can't find it. There's nobody around, and it's like, oh no, is anyone going to show up who can be worthy of this? And that's what's so incredible about. Oh, we do see the one who is worthy. He gets introduced immediately,
Yep.
and this is one of my favorite chapters in Revelation.
Really?
Because it's just like, somebody is worthy. I know who he is, And you see it continues on here in verse 9. They break into song because this lamb that was slain is worthy, and they break into song in verse 9 saying, "You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals because you were slain, And with your blood, you purchased for God persons from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God, and they will reign on the earth. That's an incredible, like, that's a summation of the gospel right there. in a lot of ways,
Absolutely.
you know?
And I forgot to mention back when we were talking about the Lion of Judah, that part of the text where it says, "To him shall be the obedience of the peoples."
Yeah.
That also, that anytime you read in the Old Testament the peoples or the nations, it's actually talking about the Gentiles. And so this is the fulfillment of the ancient promise that the Gentiles would be incorporated into the Israel of God.
Yeah, into the people. And that's what's so cool is just this lamb that was slain. The line is so strong to me. Your blood you purchased for God, persons from every tribe and language and people and nation. And that is something to break into song about, you know? My point I've always liked to make is that this is an example of some language that gets incorporated into a worship song, which we even used at Wayfarers recently for one of our spiritual formation nights. A song by Andrew Peterson called "Is He Worthy?" That just literally pulls from this. Yeah, me and Zach were over here singing as we were getting
What's
ready.
the name of the song?
Is He Worthy?
He is.
And it directly pulls from Revelation. He
Ready?
is.
Air punch.
And I think the thing I've really realized about that is that I really think a big part of the purpose of Revelation is it's supposed to lead us to break out in song and worship, you know? And I think sometimes we get really, really into the nitty gritty of like decoding it and trying to understand it and stuff like that. And if it's not leading us to worship, you know,
Missing the point.
Are we missing part of what it's supposed to do? And I this is why I always love how real artistic types of people in the church sometimes catch things that the rest of us don't. And I've noticed that a lot with how many worship songs pull from Revelation. Like there's verses in Revelation you're going to be reading through as we read through here. And like, oh, I've known that. I've heard of that before. I heard that in a song. I remember singing that in a hymn. I remember singing that in church. And you may have not known it was from Revelation. And I think it's because sometimes certain people pick up on that in Revelation, whereas we tend to get lost in the weeds.
You know, and that's not true just with the new music. If you go back to the old music as well,
Which may have been a lot better.
Have you
Of it. But especially reading through it even just now, I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Should lead to worship. And I think that's an important part of what this is supposed to inspire, what this book is supposed to inspire. But the very last verse of that little song is a great one, where you wanted to make a point, Greg, about verse 10. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God, and this line is important, and they will reign on the earth.
So yeah, this is well. First of all, the kingdom and priest references from Exodus 19:6, where God called the people of Israel, and said that they would be called them to be, or referred to them as a kingdom of priests, and further evidence that the people of God are now composed of both Jew and Gentile, and this is the ultimate fulfillment of what God was trying to do in the beginning. This mongrel group of people from all cultures and nations of the world that were referred to as Gentiles become the true Israel of God, together with the believing Jews also, and they will reign on the earth. But I thought we were supposed to reign in heaven.
Yeah.
That's what
My
all
dadgum harps,
that's what all
my
a lot
dadgum
of the
wings.
songs say. We're supposed to reign in heaven, and we're supposed to get wings, and we're supposed to play harps.
Yeah.
We're supposed to sit on the clouds. That's not the
Really?
The promises of Scripture are very earthly. That's more of a
It's a Greek thing, right?
Greek
All I
religious
ever wanted in
concept,
life
you
is
know.
wings.
And I think the Romans called it. I forget the name of it. What's the term for heaven that they had? Anyway,
The Greek term was Mount Olympus.
Mount Olympus.
And a lot of the visions that we have of heaven, we don't realize are actually more Greek ideas of Mount Olympus than actually in the Bible. Like the Bible doesn't ever.
Biblical prophecies about the final state are very earthy, very earthy. For example, and this comes out in the New Testament as well, when Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount said that the blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit. They're going to
You will hurt the earth.
inherit the earth. The earth, not heaven. And the promise to Abraham. Oh, this is interesting. In Romans 4:13, the Apostle Paul is making reference to the promise that was given to Abraham when Abraham was called in this original story. This original story started with that blessing given to Abraham. And he said that his offspring would be the heir of, these are the words of Paul, the heir of the world. And which is a change from the Hebrew, which is heir of the
Yeah, the
land.
promise to Abraham is you're going to inherit the land.
The land,
And-
which was thought to be the land of Canaan, you know.
Right. And so Paul, when he's quoting that later,
He actually-
quotes all of it and then changes one word at the
Yeah.
end.
Changes the word from land to cosmos in the Greek, which is the whole world. And I think that's on purpose. It's to show that this promise has expanded beyond Palestine. This is the entire earth that he's talking about.
Yeah. And that's what he made us to do. Verse 10 says, you've made them to be a kingdom of priests, to serve our God, and to reign on the earth.
Okay, so that is something I want to touch on just briefly.
Yeah.
Because I have it saved for later to expound on. Is what you just described is a metonymy. Is a word.
Okay.
It's a big word. Don't be
Yeah.
afraid. It's a big word.
When a part of something represents the whole.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So Abraham's promise that God promises him is
The land.
represents, or is like a specific, right?
It's like a part.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but the promise that Paul is talking about is a general thing,
The whole thing.
and it means something bigger, and it's definitely a prophetic theme that a lot of prophets use.
Oh, yeah. It's real common.
Like a lot of time they use, was it Edom for all of Israel,
Yep.
or Mount Seir? They'll be talking about judgments on Mount Seir for, I don't remember who it is, but they were
Yep.
like the sister tribes of Samaria, I think.
It's kind of like the way sometimes you will have in the news recently with things going on between Russia and Ukraine, people will say things like Moscow is doing this, that, and the other. And
Yeah.
we know they don't just
Yeah.
mean Moscow, they
Yeah.
mean all of Russia, but they're using a part to talk about
Or back in the
whole-
day when I was a teenager, one teenager would ask another, "Hey, you got wheels tonight?"
They're a little more important than they want a little more than just the wheels.
The wheels.
And so that is
That's a theme that keeps coming up,
right.
and it's
so it's not like
important to
it's
know.
not weird that Paul's doing
Well, we just
that.
saw
because
another-
prophets used to do that.
Yeah,
We just saw another example earlier, the scepter, which represents the kingdom.
Yeah.
It's one small object that represents the whole kingdom.
Yep. And so that promise is important. The purpose of all of this is for a reign on the earth, which is good to keep in
kingdom
mind as we
and
go on.
priests.
Yep. And then the very last verses talk about, I looked and I hear all these angels numbering thousands upon thousands.
10,000s upon 10,000.
Yeah, it's just like a ton of them circling the throne, and the living creatures and the elders, all of the characters that have been introduced so far. It's just like bringing them all back up, and all of them together in one loud voice are saying, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power, wealth, wisdom, strength, honor, and glory and praise." And every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and the sea and all that is in them, saying, "To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be the praise, glory, and power forever and ever." The four living creatures said, "Amen." The elders fell down and worshiped. The idea is everything ever, all the characters we've introduced so far, all of the creatures on the sea, under the sea, on the earth, everybody is joining together in that worship of.
So this is like the appropriate example
Yeah.
of what you should do.
Right.
Like the very next chapter, terrible stuff. And
Right.
it's almost like
It's like contrasting.
Yeah.
You get this contrast of like worship and praise for everybody, or everybody involved in worship and praise. And then on the other side, we're going to get into
I
judgment.
think it's important to reemphasize, just in case somebody didn't get the point, that we're talking here about Jesus.
Yes.
This is about Jesus.
Yeah.
He is every bit as worthy. He is that promised Messiah, but he is every bit as worthy of worship as God the Father
Yeah.
that we saw in the previous chapter.
Yeah.
And that's the miracle of this message.
Absolutely. So one last thing I want to mention, and then we're going to finish up here for today. I want to
than
jump back
that-
a few verses right here to the very middle of it, where you get this really interesting phrase where the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fall down before the Lamb. This is in verse 8. And each one of them has a harp, and they are holding golden bowls full of incense. But then it says, which are the prayers of God's people. And so, one, I love a point you brought up, Zach, that these prayers, it could have easily just said, there's these prayers, the prayers of the people, good of God. But that language doesn't really capture how beautiful these prayers are to God. And so the language here is of golden bowls, super valuable golden bowls, full of incense, which is used to worship, and smells sweet, smells great,
Also,
and
weren't there golden bowls of incense in the tabernacle? Yeah, so
This is a temple.
yeah,
so
this is
we can understand that even then that represented the prayers of the people. It wasn't
Oh,
that,
yeah.
that was something that they should worship those
Yeah.
bowls somehow.
And so it was clear that this is a temple. That's what those mean. Even pagan temples had bowls of incense. But this is a good way to show a point you've been making a lot here, Greg, with us, which is that this is an example of John being like, hey, just in case you guys get too concerned or get too in the weeds about what this means, I'm not talking about actual golden bowls. He says, these are the prayers of the people.
It's called a metaphor. people.
Yeah.
And I really like how my Bible puts it, because they're really good about putting parentheses where the original author meant
Yeah.
a parentheses
Right.
statement.
Because there's no parentheses in Greek, so you
Right.
have to just interpret it.
So they put it there in parentheses, which are the prayers of the saints. I was like, oh, thank goodness.
I wouldn't have
So
got
much
it.
easier.
And so this is just the only point of bringing that up is just to give us permission sometimes to understand that,
These things are weighty.
yeah, and that they can mean other things than what it seems like they literally mean on the
And I
page.
think when we say that, we need to also point out that the fact that it means something else does not take away the value of it. It's just as, I think people confuse literal with real. Something can be figurative and metaphorical, but still be real.
Right.
So I think
Yeah.
that's an important. We've
like, I
talked
don't-
about that in one of our previous sessions. but
Right.
Good to point that out here.
It's like saying, I don't know any other way you could have put this, arranged the English words to get the same meaning across.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The imagery sometimes more powerfully explains a reality than just prose could.
And you know why that is? I think the human brain, we think and we connect to reality in our minds more directly and immediately through images.
Yeah, than just abstract words.
Than
and
just
concepts.
abstract words, right?
Yeah, and so God has always understood that because He made us that way. So He's like, you want to know what these prayers are like?
They're like
Golden
incense.
bowls of incense, which it really is also a beautiful image.
Yeah, it
you know,
is.
of how important the prayers of God's people are
To Him.
To Him,
Yeah.
how sweet they smell, how good they are, and how much worship they are for Him. So, hopefully, that will lead you. I don't know, like this whole chapter just makes me want to sing worship songs and pray and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
one of the
so.
most amazing things about God that is hard for our minds to take in is how can He be so tender and loving and yet so powerful? at the same time? We usually disassociate those two. Usually the tender people are the weak ones who don't have a lot of
Right.
power, but God is all powerful and yet He's so. That's just
He's a lion and a lamb.
He's a lion and a lamb.
Yeah,
That's right.
And that's a good segue because in the next chapter we're gonna get a taste of that power.
Did you ever see
These 7 seals.
there was a video from the Bible Project talking about the I am statement.
I
From
don't
God?
think
I
so.
don't think I've seen it.
Oh my gosh, that's a really good one. That helped me understand what that is. It's like when God said to Moses, he said,
I am who I am.
well, he said, Ehwe, which is, I am what I am. But Moses couldn't say that, so he told him Yahweh, says, you will be what you will be. But he's too, like, I think it's in the, either in the Mishnah or one of those extra Jewish books that we don't read. It talks about that kind of like a commentary does, and it's revealing that when God says that, he's like, any aspect, any facet, any description I give of myself that I reveal to you, I am like the realest, most best description of that facet that I reveal to you that you will ever find.
Yeah.
So when he says, you know, I
Worthy.
am full of hate for the things going on right now, I'm full of wrath, or I am love. When God says I am love, he means I am the thickest example of that you'll ever find.
I like that. That's awesome. It's the weighty, fullest version of what any, you get a taste of it here. Now imagine the most extreme version of that.
Yeah.
That's what God is. So, like I said, we're going to get a taste of that judgment side in the very next chapter here a little bit with the 7 seals. So, tune in next time as we get into chapter 6.
Here we go. Every time you suffer, every time they oppress you, I'll be watching over you.
Hey everybody, thanks for checking out this podcast episode. If you want to help us produce it and the other podcasts like it that we do at Wayfarers, I'd encourage you to visit us at wayfarerscc.com/give. I also want to give a shout out to Mid-South Christian College. Myself and our podcasting professor, Greg Waddell, are professors at the school, and if you want to learn more about the Bible, prepare yourself for ministry, Mid-South is one of the best places to do it. Check it out at midsouthchristian.edu. Thanks.